So, great to be here and talk about community labor partnerships, because that's what Jobs with Justice is. That was the nature of it from the beginning. Let me give a shout out to, not by name because there are too many, but the CWAers that are here. Thanks a lot, it warms my heart. Wide range. Some of you don't know a lot about our union, some don't, but we have folks here from our university workers, UPD, University Professional Technical Employees. And we have a bunch of folks here from the telecom part of our union, here right down the street, right, Orange? And also San Jose. These are, the locals are actually more than that, because you have child care and taxis and other things, right? And then we have flight attendants, at least one over there, right, Stan? Then we have a bunch of our brothers and sisters who work as part of the National Union here in District 9, who I work with, so thanks for being here. And we have Sarah, and who else from the Newspaper Guild? Rebecca, Steve, Mike, okay, right, all kinds of members here from the Newspaper Guild CWA. So they're, that's not what I came to talk about, but I wouldn't come here and not be among my own sisters and brothers. So, to your point about community labor partnerships, and well, before actually I do that, I also want to give a shout out to PM, who's our publisher here, and lots of, I'll give a plug. Lots of other great books over there, some of them reissues that I remember from a long time ago, and some of them new.
Teachers.
Well, there's lots of unions here, yeah. Did you want to give a shout out to particular ones?
AMT 2121, UESF.
Who else wants to give a shout out to UFCW? Where's that? UFCW is here. SEIU over here, great. I did at UFCW, Edward.
Yes, and in addition to UFCW Local 5 and 648.
Okay. All right, I don't want to use all my minutes on this, if that's okay. Okay. This will teach me in San Francisco not to do a single one of those things. So, I mean, it's interesting because this did start for the same reason and sort of in the same spirit 26 years ago, that we find ourselves in new struggles like fast food workers that we're going to hear about. So for me, I had come from New Jersey in CWA, whole history there. Brother Steve was in part of that with me, to be the organizing director of CWA in DC. And like others at that time, we had done community labor solidarity work in different places. But it was clear to me that even then, organizing rights in this country were dead. And unfortunately, it's still not clear enough what that means and what the implications of that are. And to us then, to me then, it came out of a very particular fight. There was a telecom company called MCI. It's long gone. You know, everything's restructured all the time here, but it was really big. And there was a call center outside of Detroit, right on the edge of Detroit, and 450 people organized there and joined our union. And the short story is that the week before a National Labor Relations Board hearing, and this is in the introduction, so you should all grab a book, a short version of the story. They organized, there was a great committee, it was mostly African-American workforce, many of them first-generation college graduates. And a week before, the NLRB was holding a hearing to schedule an election. This is in 1986, actually, right before Christmas. The company told everybody that the next day they would go to one of 10 different hotels. And when they got to the hotel, they were told that the day before, Monday, was your last day of work. We're really not doing any training or meeting here. We just didn't want everybody together when we told you. And you have 10 minutes, you can make appointments, 10 minutes you can go in the building, clear out your position, and go home. We've moved the work to Iowa, and we've contracted it out. So this is 1986. So, you know, one of the frustrations for me is, I mean, I try not to work all the time off of frustration, but a lot of us are sort of late learning this, that the normal rights that working class people have in a democracy have really been missing here for like, 30 years or more. And the kind of labor movement that was built in this city in 1934 in a general strike that spread across the city, started on the docks and probably some other places, that then led to 1 million workers a year organizing and winning recognition. That lasted really right through World War II and right into the McCarthy era when a lot of this was smashed. But that led to more than 10 million workers, 10 million, in an economy half the size of this one, winning recognition, winning collective bargaining, building unions, and changing life for working class, a lot of working class people in this country. When that particular movement peaked, which is in the early 50s, 35% of private sector workers, 1 out of 3, had collective bargaining rights. And in my introduction here, you see the chart, which is worth looking at, and you can sort of see it even from a distance. So it goes from 8% in the Depression, 8%, 1 out of 12 workers with bargaining rights, goes all the way up to 35, and now we're back to 6.6, and which is where it was in 1900. And then the second chart in here shows what happened to the standard of living. So when that organizing was occurring, again, San Francisco was one of the key places that launched that organizing. The city didn't launch it, obviously, people. But from that period, from 1935 to early 50s, really later, late 50s, the productivity gains, what we as a class, as working people produce in the country, and our pay was sort of going arm in arm. So people were getting pay raises in real dollar terms. Since 1970, again, it's in the book, right? We're going to sell some books later. What you see is this gigantic gap between what we produce and what we get paid translates into, and you all know this, but that directly translates into stagnation, the worst standard of living stagnation, not the poorest country, obviously, but the worst stagnation of any country in the world, any country. This includes any country you pick, whether democracy or not, the worst wage stagnation in the world here. And that's, of course, tied to many different factors. But the question is, what do we do about it? And again, just bridging for a second. So in CWA, the sort of path we're on, that we're not the only ones on it, but it's in this little book that you can download off the web, and some of it is in that introduction. Building a Movement for Economic Justice and Democracy. But it's even broader than when we started Jobs with Justice 26 years ago, because Jobs with Justice is still premised on really 3 things. And there's pledge cards here, and they still have the same 3 things. So this is pretty good. This held up for 25 years. Bargaining and organizing rights, the standard of living, and secure, stable jobs. Same 3 things. It was clear 26 years ago they were in collapse. And yet the problem is that those of us in labor are so focused, rightly so, in part, on the immediate contract fight in front of us, or representing sisters and brothers on the job, that we haven't built, obviously, the kind of broad-based movement we need, with the partners we need, not just in community, but all kinds of partnerships that are deeper, not coalitions, not transactional, but much deeper, based on, in our view, those kinds of things that we sign up for in Jobs with Justice, and we say 5 times a year we'll be there for somebody else's fight. Another one of the problems of labor, in particular, is thinking that my fight's the most important one, whatever it is. My fight for a contract at AT&T, my fight for a contract at the newspaper, or the United Airlines camp. Everybody thinks their thing, that's just a few of them. We got a lot of these. We have like 1,000 of these just in this union. But everybody thinks that's the most important one, and it is for them. But the premise of Jobs with Justice from the beginning is 5 times a year, not 500, some of you are probably 500 times a year, or 50, or 15, but just 5 times a year, if even the 15 million people in this country who still had collective bargaining, and in this room, hopefully lots of community partners, so that would, we chart that out in this other booklet, there's 50 million people sort of on the progressive side of things in this country. Just imagine if the 50 million, or even the 15 million, showed up 5 times a year for somebody else's fight, and took that consciously, and we actually used, a little bit of data to make sure we actually signed the pledge and then did it. So we knew 26 years ago that would turn things around. We had massive fights and demonstrations even then. Some of them are well known. The Eastern Airlines fight, Pittston Coal. If you read the book, lots of fights at Verizon that many people here have either been in or supporting for almost that entire time in our union. So that's sort of a basic thing. But the other thing that we're adding on now is that democracy itself is in shambles here. Not only the labor movement, the democracy, and particularly in several key ways. So obviously the immigration fight is part of that. But aside from the immigration fight, money in politics, $7 billion was spent on the 2012 election. That's nowhere else in the world does that occur. Voting rights, we only have 70% of citizens. That's without the other 11 million. There's 45 million citizens not registered to vote, and 30 states have passed laws to make that harder. And so when you add these, and then the Senate. So even when we win, like in 2009, by most, not at the ultimate for anybody in this room, but we won a lot of stuff in that election in 2008. And Pelosi, who lives here, her House actually passed 400 bills that were somewhat worthwhile. I think we'd all agree if we went through them. And not a single one ever got discussed in the U.S. Senate for a second because of the way the Senate operates. So we call that Senate rules. So we could add other things to all this. But the point is that we have to build this broader movement, actually beyond the community labor partnership, but a movement that talks about, in clear terms, economic justice and democracy in structural ways, not just a euphemism for democracy, but very specific reforms that we have to fight for, because we'll never get the economic justice on any scale if we agree to keep engaging in elections and playing by these rules. And so we have to do all of that at the same time. So back to the book. So the book, to me, is an emotional thing, because I know most of the people. This book was not written at one time, and it's a year late, by the way. You can figure that out, that it's 26 and it says 25. But, right, it took us a while to get it out. That doesn't make any difference. The point is, these are individual coalitions like yours, and you have Izzy from San Francisco. And I could go through a lot of them, and some of them are ones that I was personally involved in, helped to start, or whatever, and they're very, very deep and meaningful to me. But they're also nationally linked. And on many of the campaigns we take on in Jobs with Justice, what you see when you read through these stories is people who really didn't know each other and got active. It's relationships. There's a lot of it. It's not just who in the room has the smartest ideas. And I know in San Francisco I could get 100 great ideas here, right? And like what I said about the union, and everybody would think they have the greatest idea, and you probably do. But it's about the relationships of how we form this kind of solidarity together, where we won't just talk about it, but we'll actually, sit down if we need to in the street, or we will fight together, we will act together, we will mobilize together. Those of us who are shop stewards or local union officers will figure out how to translate other people's fights into our terms, whether it's retiree health care, or whether it's health care at all, or whether it's just to have a decent job, and how we translate these things. So it isn't just about fast food, it's about our standard of living, and therefore why we should all show up. We're not just showing up in solidarity for people who are getting screwed. We're showing up because we need to raise wages across the board, and we start to act on that basis. So a couple of the stories in here, and then I'm going to turn it over. We'll hear more about fast food, and we can come back to a conversation. The first story in here is a woman named Maddie Stiegel. And I met her in 1986. And actually, before I talk about her for a second, so to me, the most powerful thing about this book is we could take a room like this, if we had an hour and a half, which we don't, and we could, each of you could pull the name of one of these people out of a hat. We just did this in DC 2 days ago. And in 10 minutes, you each get one of the names, like somebody gets Maddie Stiegel. And you got 5 minutes and you read about Maddie. And then you get 1 minute to talk to the group about Maddie. And what's cool about this book is, when you do that, here's a tip, it actually works. When you do that, and then everybody spends their 1 minute talking to everybody about their one story, what you see is these stories are mostly in common, even though they're spread out north and south, east, west, the whole bit. Very different types of people. Some of them are full-time organizers. Then you have a case like Maddie, cafeteria worker in East Texas, and her fight for basic dignity and what she experienced and how it was linked to the civil rights struggle of 25 years before that, in 1986, at Stephen F. Austin University. And this is an African-American woman who was incredibly smart, became a leader of our union through this fight, because in Texas, the state workers who have no bargaining rights at all, we have 12,000 members there among them. And she talks about why their fight by itself couldn't have gone anywhere. And then how you related that fight in Nacogdoches. This is a place nobody here can spell and few have heard of. And what we all felt as that movement built up in Nacogdoches, Texas in the late 80s, on one day where we had 2,500 people came from mostly across Texas to march with Maddie to that university. Their jobs had been privatized, the company at the time called ARA, Aramark, and they won that fight, and they still have that union today. She died a year ago. But the power for her as an African-American woman in near slavery conditions in that university, making $100 a month at that time, and describing when she originally went there that the washing machine, some said white, some said colored, and she figured, I got white clothes, I put it in that one, I got colored clothes, I put it in that one. And it's that kind of emotion, these 25 stories, that tie us together from the past. And again, they're spaced out. A lot of them are people who are active now, like Izzy, to where we are today. And I believe, obviously you can tell, and I'm sure all of us do, that same strategy is more critical now than ever. And if anything, we have to broaden it out to be a bit more political than we thought at the time, in the sense of this democracy movement as well. But that if we can build those relationships, as you're doing here, and if we can make them permanent, that's a key part of this. It's no one campaign. It's not the campaign to do X and then you start all over. It's the relationships. It's a committee structure so that you figure out we can't work on everything. What can we do? That when we do those things, whether it's here now in San Francisco, or whether it's in East Texas, or whether it's in the Deep South, or in Boston, there's a great story there from one of the Jobs with Justice organizers of some of that work. That we actually can make a difference on those campaigns, but we're also learning how we can build this broader movement of 50 million that we all believe in, that can actually change in a much more fundamental way what this country is about. So